Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a premise that honestly might shock anyone who thinks you need like a PhD in math or a fancy MBA to really make it financially.
That's right. Our sources are pretty clear on this. Financial success, it turns out, has surprisingly little to do with how smart you are on paper, your IQ or formal education.
And almost everything to do with how you behave, your psychology.
Exactly. It's all about behavior.
Right.
We tend to think of finance like physics, right? All logic, numbers, hard rules.
Spreadsheets and formulas?
Yeah, but the reality, finance is much more like a behavioral science. It's messy. It's driven by human emotions, ego, fear, insecurity, all that stuff. Nuance is everything.
So the difference between, say, long-term success and just crashing and burning
Often comes down to those behavioral skills, not how much you know, but how you act. And here's the kicker. Behavior is way, way harder to teach, even to really brilliant people.
Okay, let's unpack this. We've got a really wild story from the sources, a kind of behavioral test case. Starts with a genius, a genuinely successful tech executive.
Yeah, and not just lucky. This guy designed and patented a key Wi-Fi component back in his 20s. Sold companies for, staggering amounts.
Yeah.
Objectively brilliant, incredibly successful by any normal measure.
But his relationship with money, wow. The sources describe it as a toxic mix. Deep insecurity, battling with, well, they call it childish stupidity.
He was basically a walking financial time bomb, just waiting to go off. His whole thing was hubris, needing everyone to see how rich he was, validation.
He carried actual stacks of $100 bills, like cash bricks.
Yep, inches thick, and would flash them around, show them to anyone who'd look, often drunk, bragging loudly in public, just seemed determined to make his wealth as loud and, frankly, obnoxious as possible.
Okay, there's this one anecdote that just crystallizes it, right? The gold coins.
Well, yeah, the peak hubris moment. He's at some fancy California hotel, hands a colleague thousands of dollars, tells him to go buy gold coins from a local dealer.
Physical gold coins.
Physical gold coins. Then he and his buddies take these coins down to the beach and just start skipping them into the Pacific Ocean. Like rocks.
For fun.
Just for fun. That's the quote. A pure, blatant display of contempt for money itself, just burning it visibly.
That kind of attitude. It rarely ends well. There was another story, too, right, about a lamp.
Same guy shatters a, $500 hotel lamp one night. Hotel tells him he has to pay for it, obviously.
Reasonable enough.
So he pulls out another brick of cash, violently throws $5,000 at the manager and screams, "Now get out of my face."
Yeah.
You don't need a finance degree to see that's unsustainable behavior.
And predictably, how did it end?
He went broke. Completely broke. The system rewarded his genius for a while, sure. But his behavior, that uncontrolled ego, it just stripped him of everything in the end.
Okay, so hold that image, the genius skipping gold coins into the ocean. Now let's pivot completely. Let's talk about Ronald Read.
Ronald Read, yeah. His Wikipedia entry sums it up perfectly, doesn't it? American philanthropist, investor, janitor, and gas station attendant.
Janitor and gas station attendant. Highest education, high school. Grew up poor. Fixed cars for 25 years. Swept floors at JCPenney for 17 more.
Lived a very simple life. Bought a modest little 2-bedroom house for $12,000 when he was 38. Lived there his whole life. Drove an old, beat-up Toyota Yaris.
Basically invisible, right? Completely unassuming. And yet,
when he died at 92, this quiet janitor was worth over $8 million. Out of the millions of Americans who died that year, fewer than 4,000 had a net worth that high. He was one of them.
And how? No lottery win, no secret inheritance?
Nope, nothing like that. No complex strategies. He just saved what little he could consistently, put it into what we call blue chip stocks, big, stable, well-known companies. And then he just waited. For decades, he let compounding do its magic. That was it.
So his simple, consistent behavior, patience, frugality totally eclipsed the tech guy's raw intelligence.
Completely. His secret wasn't finding the absolute highest return. It was maximizing the things he could control. His savings rate, his patience, his longevity in the market.
Okay, one more contrast to really hammer this home. Richard Fuscone.
Fuscone. Now here's the opposite end of the spectrum, pedigree-wise. Harvard-educated, Merrill Lynch executive, MBA, praised everywhere for his sound judgment. Retired young, in his 40s, planning to be a big philanthropist.
Sounds like he had it made. What went wrong?
Same trap, really, as the tech guy, ego and debt. He borrowed massively to expand this enormous mansion in Greenwich, 18,000 square feet.
18,000 square feet. Good grief.
Yeah, it was more like a compound. 11 bathrooms, 2 elevators, 2 pools. Get this, the monthly maintenance alone was over $90,000.
$90,000 a month.
A month. So when the 2008 financial crisis hits, boom, his debt was astronomical, his assets were totally illiquid, stuck in this mega mansion. He went bankrupt, completely wiped out.
The contrast is just stark, isn't it? Ronald Reed, the patient janitor, ends up a multimillionaire philanthropist. Richard Fuscone, the Harvard MBA exec, ends up bankrupt.
Patience and humility versus greed and leverage. That's the difference.
Yeah.
And it completely overrode decades of fancy education and financial expertise.
It really drives home this core idea. Financial success is fundamentally a soft skill. It's about the psychology of money. How you behave matters infinitely more than what you know on a spreadsheet.
Precisely. And that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to explore, based on our sources, the 20 most important, sometimes really counterintuitive features of that psychology, using these stories to see why behavior is the real king.
All right, section 1. Let's kick off with this idea that no one is crazy, which honestly sounds a bit nuts after hearing about gold coins in the ocean and $90 care a month mansions.
It does seem counterintuitive at first glance, yeah. But the core argument here is that what looks like completely irrational financial behavior from your perspective might make perfect sense from theirs. Because we're all anchored.
Anchored to what?
To our own unique personal history with money, our experiences. Think about it, different generations, totally different economic realities growing up, different parents with different values about saving or spending, different inflation rates, different job markets.
So everyone learns fundamentally different lessons about risk, about debt, about what money is even for.
Exactly. People aren't making these decisions in some sort of objective vacuum. They're products of their context. And this isn't just like a feeling, it's documented.
There's data.
Oh, yeah. Economists have shown that how much financial risk someone is willing to take is heavily influenced by their personal history. Specifically, the experiences they had early in their adult life, late teens, early 20s.
When you're first forming your worldview about money.
Precisely. And it often comes down to, as the source puts it, just the dumb luck of when and where you were born.
Wow. So give me an example. How does birth year change things?
Okay, great example from the research. If you grew up during a time when the stock market was generally strong and going up, you naturally learned to trust stocks. You invested more in them later in life.
Makes sense. You saw it work.
Right. But if you grew up when stocks were weak or slat or maybe crashing, you learned a different lesson. You learned caution, maybe distrust. And you tended to invest less in stocks.
Let's make that concrete. Say someone born in 1970.
Born in 1970. So their teens and 20s, those formative years, maybe starting their first job, opening a savings account that's roughly the 1980s and 1990s. What happened then?
Huge bull market, right?
Massive. The S&P 500 increased almost 10 times, even after you adjust for inflation during that period. So what's the core lesson investor A learns? Stocks go up.
Yeah.
Downturns are just temporary buying opportunities. Wealth generation machine.
Okay. Now, investor B, born 20 years earlier in 1950.
Born in 1950. So their teens and 20s are the late 60s and 70s. What did they see?
Oh, totally different picture. Stagnation, oil crisis, crazy inflation.
Exactly. Adjusted for inflation, the stock market basically went nowhere during their formative years. It was flat. What lesson does investor B learn? The market's risky, maybe rigged, doesn't really go anywhere long term. Cash is safer. Guaranteed income is better.
So you have two perfectly intelligent adults, same country, just born 20 years apart, walking around with completely different internal software about how money works.
Totally different operating manuals. One sees dips as buy, the other sees dips as I told you so. Neither's crazy. They're just responding rationally to the reality they experienced firsthand.
And this helps explain things that look objectively bad from one perspective, like the sweatshop example.
Yeah, that's a powerful one. Western observers, often rightly, look at the conditions in some overseas factories and are horrified. Low pay, long hours.
And the immediate thought from, say, a comfortable middle-class viewpoint is, that's exploitation. Nobody should live like that.
Understandable reaction. But then you get the context, like the story of the nephew of a Chinese factory worker. He explained that for his aunt getting that factory job, it was a huge step up.
From what?
Her previous career was prostitution. So in her lived reality, the choice was between dangerous, degrading exploitation on the streets or what we might call exploitation in a factory that at least offered some safety and a guaranteed, albeit small, paycheck.
So from her baseline, the factory job, however bad it looks to us, was the vastly preferable, rational choice.
It made perfect sense to her, given her options. It highlights how relative opportunity shapes what seems rational. What seems horrific to one person is a lifeline to another.
That idea of relative viewpoint, Does that explain the lottery ticket thing, too? That always seems bizarre.
Ah, the lottery paradox. Yeah. The data is pretty stark. The lowest income households in the U.S., the same group, who often report they couldn't handle a $400 emergency expense spend, on average $412 a year on lottery tickets.
Which is way more than higher income groups spend, right?
4 times more.
Yeah.
Mathematically, financially, it's about the worst investment you can make. The odds are terrible. It's a wealth drain.
So why do they do it? It seems totally irrational if you're struggling financially.
But think about the psychology, not just the math. For someone in that situation, maybe wages feel stuck, saving feels impossible, and all the good stuff, nice holidays, secure housing, a reliable car, feels completely out of reach, like it's for other people.
So the lottery ticket isn't really about the expected financial return.
Exactly. It's not an investment strategy. It's buying a dream. For that brief period between buying the ticket and the draw, they get to hold a tangible possibility, however remote, of escaping their circumstances, of getting that good stuff that higher earners might just take for granted.
They're paying for hope.
They're paying for hope. A small fee for a few days of dreaming that their life could fundamentally change. That emotional return, that feeling, is what they're actually purchasing. And we can't judge that decision using a spreadsheet designed for someone who already has financial security. It's a different calculus.
That makes a lot more sense. And compounding all this confusion is the fact that, well, modern finance is actually really new, historically speaking.
Oh, incredibly new. We're all basically toddlers learning to walk in this financial world. Think about it. The 401k, the backbone of American retirement saving, didn't even exist until 1978.
Wow, that recent.
Yeah. The Roth IRA, that came along in 1998. Widespread consumer debt, credit cards, mortgages for everyone. That really only took off after World War II. Student loan debt is a massive societal factor. That's exploded only in the last few decades as college attendance ballooned.
So we have maybe, 50 years max of collective public experience trying to navigate this world where we are individually responsible for our retirement, managing debt, investing.
Pretty much. Before that, for most people, it was pensions, maybe Social Security. Less individual control, but also less individual responsibility and fewer complex choices. Now the onus is entirely on us.
And we haven't had generations to build up the ingrained wisdom, the cultural norms for how to handle it all.
Exactly. The rules of this modern game are still being written, socially and individually. We're all collectively still winging it. So the mistakes and seemingly erratic behaviors we see, they're kind of to be expected. It's a massive learning curve for society.
Okay, moving on from our internal psychology, let's talk about external forces. The sources highlight two concepts here that are maybe surprisingly linked: luck and risk.
Yeah, they're presented not as opposites, but as siblings, two sides of the same coin. It's this crucial idea that outcomes in life, especially financial ones, aren't solely determined by your effort or your intelligence.
There are outside forces at play. Randomness.
Absolutely. Forces completely beyond your control. You're just one person among billions in a world with infinite moving parts. Stuff happens. Recognizing this requires a dose of humility, realizing your successes aren't 100% down to your genius, and your failures aren't 100% your fault either.
The sources use a really powerful example for this: Bill Gates and his high school friend, Ken Evans.
It's perfect. Bill Gates experienced what the source calls 1 in a million luck. Just by pure chance, he ended up at Lakeside School in Seattle back in 1968.
What was special about Lakeside?
It was one of the only high schools in the entire world at that time that had a computer, a terminal connected to a mainframe. Think about the odds. In 1968, there were about 303 million high school-age kids globally. Lakeside had maybe 300 students.
That's an insane stroke of luck, getting that early exposure.
Absolutely game-changing luck. Without it, who knows? But his friend, Kent Evans, was right there with him. Just as smart, just as ambitious, shared the same fascination with the computer. They were planning to start Microsoft together.
But he didn't become a founding partner. Why not?
Because Kent experienced the flip side of that coin. 1 in a million risk. He died in a mountaineering accident before they graduated high school.
Wow.
Same talent, same opportunity, same external force randomness, but with tragically opposite outcomes. One gets world-changing success, the other misses out entirely due to sheer bad luck.
It really highlights how outcomes aren't always fair reflections of effort or ability. But it's hard to talk about this, isn't it?
It's incredibly tricky. If you attribute your own success too much to luck, people think you're being falsely modest or maybe even weak. But if you attribute your failures entirely to bad luck or risk, you just sound like you're making excuses.
So people tend to default to
Praising their own skill for success and blaming external factors for failure, it's human nature. But the danger, especially when learning about finance, is focusing only on the extreme winners and losers. The Bill Gateses, the Ronald Reeds, the bankrupt tech geniuses.
Why is that dangerous?
Because those extreme outcomes are often the most heavily influenced by the extreme tales of luck and risk. They're the outliers. They might not be the most useful lessons for the rest of us. We need to look for the broader, more reliable patterns.
And maybe the most powerful yet least intuitive pattern in all of finance is compounding.
Compounding, yes. It's almost magical, but it's also deeply counterintuitive to how our brains work. The sources use a fantastic analogy to explain it. The Ice Age.
How does an ice age relate to my 401k?
It shows that you don't need massive dramatic forces to get massive dramatic results. You just need time and consistency. How does an ice age start? Not with some sudden cataclysmic freeze.
So what then?
It starts with something tiny, almost unnoticeable. Summers that are just slightly cooler than average, maybe just a degree or two.
And what does that tiny change do?
It prevents the previous winter's snow from melting completely. Just a little bit stays behind. That little leftover patch makes it easier for more snow to accumulate the next winter. It also reflects a bit more sunlight, which cools the area slightly more, further preventing melt.
And that just builds on itself.
It compounds. Year after year, that tiny, persistent difference snow not melting fully adds up. Over thousands of years, which is like a blink in geological time, you get continental ice sheets miles thick. A ridiculously small change, compounded relentlessly, fundamentally reshapes the planet.
It's the slowness that gets us, isn't it? We notice the sudden crash, the big win, but not the slow, steady accumulation.
Exactly. Our brains are wired for linear thinking. We see $100 grow by 10%, that's $10, easy. We struggle to internalize what happens when that 10% growth starts applying to $100,000, then $1 million decades down the line. The numbers get mind-bendingly large, but the process feels boringly slow day to day.
And this slow, relentless power is the real story behind someone like Warren Buffett.
It's almost the entire story. Yes, Buffett's a brilliant investor. He's achieved incredible returns, around 22% annually over his long career. That's phenomenal skill. But his real superpower, longevity.
Doing it for a really, really long time.
For 3/4 of a century. Look at his net worth, something like $84.5 billion. Now get this. $84.2 billion of that wealth was accumulated after his 50th birthday.
Wait, say that again. Almost all of it came after 50.
Almost all of it.
Yep.
And over $81 billion came after he was eligible for Social Security, after his mid-60s. It wasn't just high returns, it was pretty good returns sustained for an incredibly long period.
That puts things in perspective. What if he'd had the same skill, that 22% return, but a more normal career span, say started at 30, retired at 60?
Great hypothetical. If he'd done that, his net worth would be around $11.9 million.
$11.9 million instead of $84 billion.
Exactly, 99.9% less. The message is crystal clear. High returns are great, but they're useless if you can't stick around. Surviving the downturns, staying invested long enough for compounding to work its magic. That's the key. Longevity trumps high returns.
So someone like Jim Simons at Renaissance Technologies, he actually has higher average annual returns than Buffett, right? Like insanely high.
Phenomenally high, around 66% annually since 1988. Mathematically, he's arguably a better investor day to day, but he really hit his stride later in life, around age 50. So even with those astronomical returns, he has significantly less wealth than Buffett, simply because he had less time, fewer decades for the compounding engine to run.
So surviving the storms is more important than maximizing speed in the calm seas.
That's a great way to put it, which leads perfectly into this related idea the sources call tails you win.
Tails you win. What does that mean, like flipping a coin?
Sort of. It means that in many systems, especially finance and business, a small minority of events, the tails of the probability distribution account for the vast majority of the overall results.
Okay, break that down. What does it mean for, say, an average person investing?
It means you have to be comfortable with the fact that most of your individual efforts or investments might not be home runs. Many might even fail or just do okay. And that's perfectly normal, even necessary.
Like the art dealer example.
Exactly. Heinz Berggruen, hugely successful art dealer. He realized he could buy 100 paintings, and 99 of them could turn out to be mediocre, maybe even lose money. But if that remaining one painting was by Picasso or Matisse...
that one winner pays for all the losers and then some.
Precisely. The tail event, finding that masterpiece, drove all the profit. The minor losses were just the cost of doing business, the price of admission to find the big winner.
And this pattern holds true elsewhere, like in venture capital.
Absolutely. Classic example. One study looked at over 21,000 VC investments. What did they find? 65% of them lost money. 65%.
Wow, that's a high failure rate.
It is. But the entire spectacular return of the whole venture capital asset class came from just 1% of those deals, the ones that returned 20 times the initial investment or more. The extreme tail winners carried everything.
Does this apply even if you're not picking individual stocks or VC deals? Like if you just buy a broad market index fund?
Even there, take the Russell 3000 index that covers like 98% of the U.S. stock market. You'd think it's all pretty steady. But data shows about 40% of the companies in that index, over time, lost most of their value, like 70% or more, and basically never recovered. They became dead weight.
40% are duds. So where do the index's overall gains come from?
They come from a surprisingly small group. Just 7% of the companies in the index generated all the long-term positive returns for the entire index. Again, the tails drive the outcome.
So what's the practical lesson here for an individual if most things don't work out spectacularly?
The lesson is that your long-term success isn't determined during the easy, boring cruise control periods in the market or life. It's determined by how you react and what you do during the relatively few but inevitable moments of intense stress or crisis.
The market crashes, the recessions, the unexpected personal setbacks.
Exactly. Think about it. Over the last century or so, the U.S. economy was technically in or near a recession for something like 22% of the time. That's almost a quarter of all months where things felt scary, uncertain.
That's a lot of time to feel nervous.
It is. But the sources show that investors who simply stayed calm, stayed invested, and endured those tough 22% of months, they ended up with nearly 75% more money in the long run than those who panicked and sold out. Your behavior during the tail events, the scary times, makes all the difference.
Okay, so if survival and riding out the storms for compounding is key, we need to know what we're aiming for. Which brings us to the psychological trap the sources call never enough.
Ah, yes. The moving goalposts. This is all about the danger of social comparison, especially in today's world where wealth is so visible, or at least spending is.
The prime example here is Rajat Gupta.
Right, a tragic example. Former CEO of McKinsey, globally respected, by any normal standard, incredibly wealthy, a centimillionaire worth around $100 million.
$100 million? That's set for life, set for generations' money. What more could someone possibly need?
Apparently more. The sources suggest he looked up. He saw the people in the billionaire circle, the ultra wealthy, and felt inadequate. He wasn't satisfied with his $100 million because others had billions.
And that feeling drove him to
commit insider trading, trying to get an edge, trying to make even more money, to catch up to a level he probably never could have reached anyway. He destroyed his career, his reputation, ended up in prison.
He risked what he did have and did need.
For what he didn't have and didn't need. As Buffett famously warned about the folks at Long-Term Capital Management years ago, that is just plain foolish.
The problem is that social comparison ladder, it basically has no top rung, does it?
Effectively, no. There's always someone richer. The successful baseball player making $36 million a year might feel great until he compares himself to the top hedge fund manager making $770 million that same year.
Or Jeff Bezos adding billions in a week.
Right. The ceiling is practically unreachable for 99.9999% of humanity. So if you're constantly comparing upwards, you're signing up for perpetual dissatisfaction. The only way to win that game is to refuse to play.
To define your own enough.
Exactly. To consciously decide what level of wealth is sufficient for your life, your goals, and to stop moving the goalposts once you get there. Or at least stop letting external comparisons dictate your feelings of success.
And once you define enough, you can recognize the things that are truly priceless, things you should never risk for just a little bit more money.
Absolutely. Your reputation, your freedom and independence, your family relationships, being loved and trusted, these things have infinite value, and no amount of extra money is worth jeopardizing them.
Which connects perfectly to the next point. What is the ultimate goal of wealth? The sources argue it's freedom, control over your time.
That's the highest dividend money can pay, according to the research cited. Psychologist Angus Campbell did extensive work on happiness and well-being. His big finding: having a strong sense of controlling your own life is a more dependable predictor of happiness than your income level, the size of your house, or the prestige of your job.
More important than being rich.
More important than just the number in your bank account, yes. Money's greatest power is its ability to give you autonomy. The ability to say no to things you don't want to do. The ability to wake up and say, I can do whatever I want today. That's the ultimate luxury.
Which creates a real paradox in modern life, doesn't it? We're materially richer than ever before, certainly in developed nations.
Yeah, far richer on average than 50 or 100 years ago. Yet studies show Americans report high levels of stress, worry, anxiety. We're not necessarily happier.
Why not? If wealth buys control and we're wealthier.
The sources suggest it's because while we've used increased wealth to buy bigger houses, faster cars, more stuff, we've simultaneously traded away control over our time to get that stuff.
How so?
Think about the shift towards knowledge work. Your main tool is your brain. And as the source says, your head never leaves you. Unlike a factory worker in 1950 who punched out and was done, today's knowledge worker might technically work fewer hours, but the job is always there.
The email alert, the mental checklist, the pressure to be on.
Right. It feels like it runs 24/7. You might have more income, but less true downtime, less mental autonomy. You've traded time control for financial gain. And it turns out that might be a bad trade for overall happiness.
There was that study of elderly people too, right? Asking them about life lessons.
Yes, gerontologist Carl Pilmer interviewed thousands of older Americans. What did they value most looking back? What brought them happiness?
Not the big house or the fancy job title.
Overwhelmingly no. Nobody said, I wish I'd worked harder to make more money, or I'm glad I was richer than my neighbor. What they valued was quality time. Unstructured time spent with family, with friends, with loved ones.
They realized, maybe too late, that the people in their lives didn't want the things the extra money could buy nearly as much as they wanted the time with the person earning it.
Exactly.
Huh.
Time control emerges again as the real currency of a well-lived life.
Okay, but we do care what people think, right? That desire for respect is powerful, which leads to this concept called the man-in-the-car paradox.
This is such a great observation. It goes like this. When you see someone driving a really expensive, flashy car, a Ferrari, a Lamborghini, whatever.
You think, wow, cool car.
Right. But what's the next thought? Usually it's not, wow, the person driving that car must be really cool, successful, and admirable, is it?
No. Usually it's more like, wow, if I had that car, people would think I'm cool.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You admire the car, and you imagine how it would make you look. The actual driver is almost invisible. They're anonymous behind the wheel.
So the driver bought the car hoping for admiration, but the observer just uses the car as a mental prop for their own desire for admiration.
Precisely. The paradox is that we buy flashy things hoping for respect and admiration, but those things rarely bring it from others. People are more impressed by humility, kindness, and wisdom than they are by horsepower. You get more respect by being nice than by having nice things.
This paradox really helps clarify the difference between being rich and being wealthy. They sound similar, but they're not the same thing at all.
Not at all. Rich is about current income. It's often very visible. It's the $100,000 car, the designer clothes, the expensive watch. When you see someone driving that fancy car, all you know for sure about their financial situation is that they have $100,000 less in cash or investments than they did before they bought it.
Being rich is about spending, demonstrating income.
Often, yeah. It can be a statement, look what I can afford right now. Wealth, on the other hand, is hidden.
Wealth is what you don't spend.
Exactly. Wealth is the money you haven't spent. It's the assets working for you, growing, providing options, flexibility, security. Wealth is the ability to survive a job loss, pay for an unexpected emergency without stress, maybe retire early or change careers. It's the financial freedom that comes from not spending every dollar you make.
So the only way to actually become wealthy is to consistently spend less than you earn, to build that hidden reserve.
That's the core of it. And because true wealth is often invisible, think back to Ronald Reed, the janitor, we don't see many role models of it. We see the flashy spending of the rich, but we don't see the quiet accumulation of the wealthy. This makes it harder to learn how to actually build wealth.
Which brings us to maybe the most direct, controllable action anyone can take, saving. The sources are really emphatic about this. Your savings rate matters more than almost anything else.
More than your income level, more than your investment returns over the long run. This is incredibly empowering because it puts the control back in your hands. Well, think about it. Can you control next year's stock market returns? Or whether you'll get a huge raise? Not really. Those things have huge elements of luck and external factors. But can you control how much you spend versus how much you earn this month?
Yeah, absolutely. That's down to personal choices. Frugality, budgeting.
Right. Your personal savings rate is 100% within your control, and its effectiveness in building wealth is guaranteed, unlike hoping for high investment returns. This is where efficiency becomes key.
There's an analogy about energy efficiency.
Yeah, a great one. The U.S. became much more energy wealthy over the last few decades, not primarily by finding massive new oil fields, but by becoming dramatically more efficient, using about 60% less energy per dollar of GDP than it used to.
They got more output from less input, wasted less.
Exactly. Same principle applies to personal finance. If wealth is that gap between your income and your ego, your spending,
Yeah.
the most reliable way to widen that gap isn't always busting your gut trying to increase your income by 10%. That's hard.
It's often easier to control the other side.
Much easier, potentially. Raise your humility, control your ego, and find ways to decrease your spending by 10%. That's often far more achievable and completely within your power. People who build lasting wealth tend to just not care that much about impressing others with their stuff.
And the sources say we should save even without a specific goal in mind. That seems weird. We're always told save for retirement, save for a down payment.
Right. Goal-based saving is common advice. But the argument here is that saving purely for the sake of saving, building up a buffer with no specific purpose attached, is incredibly valuable. Think of it as saving against the unknown.
A hedge against surprises.
Exactly. Life is guaranteed to throw curveballs at you, usually at the worst possible time. Having cash saved up, even if it's earning zero interest in a bank account, provides an extraordinary return in those moments.
How so if it's earning zero?
Because that cash buys you options when things go wrong. It gives you the flexibility to walk away from a toxic job, or to handle a medical bill without panic, or to bridge the gap while you look for new work, or even to invest when markets crash and others are forced sellers. That flexibility, that control over your time and decisions during crises, that's priceless. It's worth far more than a tiny interest you might miss out on.
Okay, we've really established how much human emotion and behavior drive financial outcomes. So how do we work with that reality? The next piece of advice sounds almost wrong for finance. It's aimed to be reasonable, not rational.
It does sound heretical, doesn't it? Because finance is supposed to be all about cold, hard rationality, finding the mathematically optimal solution.
Right, the highest expected return, the perfectly optimized portfolio.
But the problem is, purely rational strategies often fail in the real world. Why? Because they're designed for emotionless robots, not for actual humans who feel fear, greed, regret, also pressure. Humans who have spouses and kids and anxieties.
So a mathematically perfect strategy is useless if the person implementing it can't actually stick with it when things get scary.
Precisely. Reasonable means finding a strategy that is good enough mathematically, but crucially, is also realistic, achievable, and psychologically sustainable for you over the long haul. Since compounding requires decades, sustainability is everything. A good plan you can stick with is far better than a perfect plan you abandon.
Didn't Harry Markowitz, the guy who literally won the Nobel Prize for portfolio optimization theory, basically admit this himself?
He did. It's a classic story. When asked how he invested his own retirement money, did he use his complex Nobel-winning optimization models?
No, right. He did something much simpler.
He just split it 50-50 between stocks and bonds,
Yeah.
50-50. When asked why, his reason wasn't about maximizing returns. He said it was to minimize my future regret.
He was optimizing for sleeping well at night, not for the absolute highest possible number on paper.
Exactly. That is the absolute definition of choosing a reasonable strategy over a purely rational one. He knew himself, knew his emotional limits, and chose a plan he could live with, even if it wasn't theoretically perfect.
And that idea of using leverage, like borrowing money to invest more in your retirement account when you're young.
Yeah.
Rationally, that might boost long-term returns on average.
Rationally on a spreadsheet, yes, maybe. But the sources call that kind of strategy absurdly unreasonable for most people. Why? Because while it might boost returns, it also introduces the very real risk of 100% wipeout if the market has a sharp downturn, which it inevitably will at some point.
And the emotional devastation of being wiped out means you'll likely never take appropriate risks again.
You're done. You quit the game. That rational strategy becomes utterly useless because the human couldn't handle the emotional toll of the potential downside. Reasonable avoids those catastrophic emotional risks.
Sticking with any plan, even a reasonable one, requires navigating uncertainty. This brings us to margin of safety, or room for error.
This is fundamental. It's about acknowledging that the world is governed by probabilities and randomness, not by certainties. You will be wrong sometimes. Things will go unexpectedly wrong. Margin of safety is how you survive those inevitabilities.
The card counting analogy was good here.
Yeah, think about a blackjack card counter. Even if they know the odds are slightly in their favor over the long run, they have a rational edge, They can't bet all their money on a single hand. Why not?
Because they could still lose that hand or several hands in a row just due to bad luck, short-term variance.
Exactly. They need a big enough bankroll,
Huh?
maybe 100 betting units, the source suggests, to withstand those inevitable swings of bad luck. They need enough buffer to survive the variance so their long-term edge can eventually play out. That buffer is their margin of safety.
So in finance, margin of safety isn't about getting richer faster.
No, it's about increasing your odds of survival. It's things like having a frugal budget, so a small income dip doesn't break you. It's having flexible thinking so you can adapt when plans change. It's holding cash reserves, like we discussed. It's avoiding excessive debt.
It's basically making sure you don't get knocked out of the game prematurely.
Precisely, so you can stay invested long enough for compounding to do its work. Buffett embodies this. He famously pledges to always run Berkshire Hathaway with more than ample cash, far more than they technically need for operations. He sees that cash not as dragging down returns, but as an essential insurance policy against the unknown. It guarantees survival.
And part of that survival mindset is how you view market volatility itself, right? The crashes, the corrections.
Yes, you have to reframe volatility. Stop seeing it as a fine you get for doing something wrong or something to be avoided at all costs. Instead, view it as a fee.
A fee for what?
It's the fee you pay for admission to the potential for long-term growth that markets offer. Returns aren't free. The price of earning potentially higher returns over time is putting up with the uncertainty and the periodic, sometimes scary downturns along the way. It's the cost of admission.
And if you try to avoid paying the fee by, say, jumping in and out of the market, trying to time the dips,
You often end up paying double. You sell low in a panic, miss the recovery, maybe buy back higher later. You pay the emotional cost and the financial cost. Accepting volatility as a normal, unavoidable fee is key to staying the course. Budget for it mentally. Expect your portfolio to drop 30% sometimes. It's normal.
Okay, one last piece of mindset advice for long-term planning. You have to accept that you will change. The sources call this the end of history illusion.
This is such a fascinating psychological quirk. Humans are terrible at predicting how much they will change in the future. We tend to feel like the person we are right now is the finished product, the person will be forever.
But research shows that's not true.
Not at all. Studies tracking people from age 18 all the way to 68 consistently show that people at every age dramatically underestimate how much their desires, their goals, their values, even their core personality traits will change over the next decade.
So the 25-year-old meticulously planning their retirement based on their current desires
Is planning for a 65-year-old stranger, essentially.
Yeah.
The 65-year-old version of them will likely want different things, value different experiences than the 25-year-old could possibly imagine.
What are the financial implications of that? How should we plan if we know our future selves will be different?
The main takeaway is to avoid extremes in long-term planning. Avoid locking yourself into a path that allows for no flexibility or change of heart.
Like, don't plan for a retirement that requires monk-like austerity for 40 years.
Probably not, because your future self might regret missing out on life experiences along the way. But also, don't commit your entire life to chasing maximum income in a job you hate, assuming your future self will only care about the money. They might desperately wish for more time or meaning instead.
Why do extremes backfire?
Because the benefits of extreme plans often wear off. You adapt to the high income, or you get used to the austerity. But the downsides, the decades spent in a miserable job, or the inability to afford simple pleasures in retirement, those create deep, lasting regrets for the different person you eventually become.
So the key is building flexibility into your plan.
I am.
And being willing to change course.
Exactly. Don't become a prisoner to the decisions made by a younger, less experienced version of yourself. This means being willing to abandon sunk costs the time, money, or effort you've already put into something, like a career path chosen at 18.
That's hard, though, cutting losses on something you've invested years in.
It's incredibly hard psychologically. But sunk costs are irrelevant to your future happiness. Holding on to a path that no longer fits who you are now just because you spent a long time getting there only guarantees that your future self will be miserable, trapped by the ghost of your past self's decisions. You need to be willing to pivot, sometimes ruthlessly.
Okay, let's shift to how we navigate the world of financial information itself. There seems to be a constant barrage of negativity, doesn't there? This is what the sources call the seduction of pessimism.
It's true. Bad news just grabs our attention more. Pessimism often sounds smarter, more intellectual, more grounded than optimism.
Why is that? Is it evolutionary?
Largely, yes. From an evolutionary standpoint, paying attention to potential threats, A predator, a storm, a rival tribe was crucial for survival. Ignoring good news, finding some berries, was less consequential than ignoring bad news. We're wired to prioritize threats. Loss aversion is powerful. Losing $100 hurts about twice as much as gaining $100 feels good.
So a financial analyst predicting doom and gloom gets more airtime, sounds more serious.
Absolutely. They seem cautious, intelligent. Someone predicting a huge boom often sounds naive or reckless. Think back to the 2008 crisis.
Yeah, lots of dire forecasts.
Right. There was that Russian professor who predicted the U.S. would literally break apart into 6 separate countries by the mid-2010s. And his prediction was reported seriously in major financial media.
That sounds completely outlandish now.
It was then, too. But compare the serious reception that got with the likely reaction if, say, a Japanese academic in 1946, right after WWII, when Japan was devastated, had predicted the country's unbelievable economic recovery, its rise to a global tech leader, its doubling of life expectancy within a few decades.
They would have been laughed out of the room, called delusional.
Exactly. Comically aloof of risks, as the source puts it. Extreme pessimism sounds profound. Extreme optimism sounds foolish, even if the optimism turns out to be more accurate historically.
And pessimists often miss something crucial, don't they? They just extrapolate current problems indefinitely.
They often miss adaptation. Markets and people adapt. Problems create incentives for solutions. Remember the peak oil fears around 2008 when prices were sky high? Everyone predicted we'd run out imminently. Those high prices spurred incredible innovation in fracking and horizontal drilling. Suddenly, vast new reserves became accessible. The problem incentivized its own solution. Pessimists often underestimate human ingenuity and the power of market incentives to solve problems.
There's also the point about speed. Bad things happen fast, good things happen slowly.
That's a huge factor in pessimism's appeal. Growth, progress, wealth building, these are usually driven by compounding, which is slow, steady, almost invisible day to day. Think about the massive, decades-long decline in heart disease deaths, a huge societal win, but it happened gradually.
Whereas destruction
Destruction can be incredibly fast. A market crash, a natural disaster, a war, these happen suddenly. Driven by single points of failure. They grab headlines. They dominate our attention. The slow, quiet march of progress gets overlooked, while the sudden shock of setbacks feels much more real and urgent. Optimism's power unfolds over years. Pessimism hits like a ton of bricks.
So if we're trying to achieve that slow compound growth, but we're constantly bombarded by fast pessimism and market noise, it's easy to get thrown off course, which relates to this idea of playing different games.
This is a really important concept for avoiding mistakes. It's about the danger of taking your financial cues from other people who are playing a completely different game than you are, with different goals, different time horizons, different risk tolerances.
How does this cause problems, like in market bubbles?
Bubbles are a perfect example. Think about the U.S. housing bubble in the mid-2000s. You had different players involved. You had short-term traders, house flippers.
Their game was quick profits, buy, maybe slap on some paint, sell in a few months for more.
Right. They were playing a momentum game. They might have known prices were getting detached from fundamental value, but they rationally bought anyway because they expected prices to keep rising in the short term long enough for them to get out with a profit. Their time horizon was months, maybe weeks.
Okay, that's their game. But then you have long-term home buyers, or maybe buy and hold real estate investors.
Exactly. Their game should be about long-term value, affordability, rental yields, etc. But what happens in a bubble? They see prices soaring, largely because of the flippers' activity, and they get caught up in the frenzy.
They start taking cues from the flippers game.
Precisely. They abandon their own long-term metrics and start thinking, I need to buy now before prices go even higher. They get persuaded by the rising prices, ignoring the fact that those prices are being driven by people playing a totally different short-term game. The long-term players get sucked into the short-term players' momentum game, often with disastrous results when the momentum inevitably breaks.
So the lesson is, define your game. Know your goals, your time horizon, your risk tolerance.
And stick to it. Don't let the actions or the apparent success of people playing a different game influence your decisions. If you're a long-term retirement saver investing for 30 years, the daily wiggles of the market or the hot trades of a day trader are completely irrelevant noise to you. But rising prices are seductive. They can make anyone forget their strategy if they're not careful. Identify whose game you're paying attention to and ask if it's the same as yours.
This all connects back to history. To understand our current financial behaviors, especially around debt and expectations, the sources give a quick history of the U.S. consumer after World War II.
Yeah, it's really illuminating context. That period, right after the war, say 1945 up to the early 1970s, was kind of a golden age for the average American worker, financially speaking.
How so? Low debt, good wages.
Both. Debt levels were relatively low compared to incomes, and income growth was strong across the board, but especially for the middle and working classes. The gap between the rich and the average person wasn't nearly as vast as it is today. The country got richer by making the poor less poor.
And consumption was encouraged.
Actively promoted. Think mass production, the rise of suburbs, cheap credit becoming available, the GI Bill helping veterans buy homes and get educated. There was this shared expectation of a stable, attainable, middle-class life that felt within reach for almost everyone. The 50th percentile lifestyle was understandable and relatable to the 99th percentile.
But then things started to change around the 1970s.
Yeah, a big shift started around 1973. Economic growth continued overall, but it became incredibly uneven. Income gains became heavily concentrated at the very top. The top 1% saw their income skyrocket, while wages for the median worker basically flattened out. They stopped keeping pace.
But the expectations didn't flatten out. People still expected that continuously improving lifestyle they saw their parents achieve.
Exactly. That post-war dream of steady progress, the bigger house, the 2 cars, the nice vacations, that expectation was deeply ingrained. But now, for the average family, wages weren't rising enough to pay for it.
So how did they bridge the gap between flat wager and rising expectations?
Debt. Massive amounts of debt. To maintain or achieve that expected lifestyle, median earners started borrowing like never before. Household debt relative to income roughly doubled, climbing from around 60% in the 70s to over 130% by 2007, just before the crash.
So that cultural shift towards accepting high levels of debt was driven by trying to keep up with expectations set in a previous economic era.
Largely, yes. Trying to maintain a lifestyle comparable to the increasingly wealthy top tier, fueled by the lingering memory of the more equal post-war boom. And that widespread vulnerability created by high debt levels was a key factor that made the 2008 financial crisis so severe for so many households.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground, the psychology, the history, the pitfalls. Let's try to wrap this up now. Let's synthesize the final wisdom, the actionable principles we can take away from all this.
Right, pulling it all together. Based on these psychological insights and stories, what are the core behavioral takeaways?
First one seems clear from the genius versus janitor stories. Less ego, more wealth.
Absolutely. Wealth is often just that quiet, unspent gap between what you earn and what your ego tells you need to spend to impress others. Control the ego, widen the gap.
Second, thinking about the tails, you win idea and market crashes. Be okay with things going wrong.
Yeah. Accept that you'll make mistakes, investments will underperform, recessions will happen. You can be wrong often, even half the time, and still build wealth if the few things that go right go really right, and if you survive the downturns. Survival is key.
Third, focusing on the ultimate goal, use money for control.
That's its best purpose. The highest dividend money pays is autonomy, independence, control over your time. Prioritize that over just accumulating more stuff.
Fourth, countering the man-in-the-car paradox, be nicer and less flashy.
Simple but true. Humility, kindness, generosity, these earn you far more genuine respect and lead to more fulfillment than any expensive possession ever will.
Focus on being a good person, not just looking like a rich one. And finally, tying together margin of safety and compounding. Define and pay the price.
Meaning accept volatility. Yes. Accept market downturns and uncertainty as the unavoidable fee for potential long-term growth. Don't treat it like a fine for being wrong. Build in room for error in your plans. Worship that margin of safety so you can endure the fee and stay in the game long enough to reap the rewards.
These principles are great, but they need to be personalized, right? That's the final caveat, the doctor's dilemma.
Exactly. Financial advice shouldn't be one size fits all. It should be more like modern medicine. A good doctor doesn't just prescribe the rationally optimal treatment based on statistics.
They consider the individual patient.
Right. They present options. They respect the patient's unique situation, their fears, their goals, their lifestyle. They understand that the final decision about treatment isn't just made on a spreadsheet. It's made by the patient, considering their whole life.
So there's no single right financial answer that works for everyone.
No. There's only the answer that is reasonable, sustainable, and psychologically comfortable for you, given your unique circumstances and temperament.
Yeah.
What helps you sleep at night, what allows you to stick with the plan long term, that's likely the best plan for you, even if it doesn't look perfect on paper.
I guess I can share my own approach here, which kind of embodies that reasonable over rational idea.
Mhm.
My wife and I, we invest mostly in simple, low-cost index funds for the long haul, standard stuff.
Makes sense.
But we also keep about 20% of our liquid assets outside of our home equity just sitting in cash, plain old cash or cash equivalents, earning basically nothing.
Okay, a purely rational advisor might have a heart attack hearing that. That cash is losing purchasing power to inflation every single day. It's inefficient.
Totally indefensible on paper, but that 20% cash buffer, for us, that's not about maximizing returns. It's about maximizing peace of mind. It's our sleep at night money.
It's your margin of safety, your independence fund.
Exactly. It ensures, to the highest probability possible, that we will never be forced to sell our stocks at a bad time because of some unexpected life event, a job loss, a medical issue, whatever. It buys us endurance.
So you're consciously choosing psychological comfort and resilience over potentially higher but more fragile returns.
We are. Because for us, the ability to stay the course and sleep soundly is more valuable than squeezing out every last percentage point of return. Sometimes you have to choose between being happy and being right, according to a spreadsheet. We choose happy, or at least less stressed.
And that ties perfectly into maybe a final provocative thought for you, our listeners, to ponder. Think about that history of the U.S. consumer. Material standards of living have exploded, maybe 20-fold higher since the 1950s in real terms. We have more stuff, bigger houses, better medicine.
But are people 20 times happier?
All the evidence suggests no, not significantly happier, maybe even more stressed.
Right.
Why? Perhaps because in the relentless pursuit of that material gain, we've inadvertently traded away something even more valuable: control over our time.
We got richer, but we lost autonomy along the way.
It's a possibility to consider. Maybe the ultimate financial frontier isn't just about earning more money. Maybe it's about using the money we do have to consciously buy back control over our own time, to regain that independence. That might be where true wealth really lies.